Are we in a recession or not? Spotify, IBM, HP, Cisco, Zillow, Meta, Salesforce, Microsoft, Amazon, Twitter, Alphabet, Twilio, Snap, Shopify, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Coinbase, Stripe. These firms are laying off people like you read about, and their investor relations departments are working overtime to sell recession fears to the business channels. The dire warnings from economic elites about the economic downturn in 2022 never materialized, despite the Federal Reserve's best efforts to drag down the economy and trigger an unemployment crisis. But many of them are still at it, which can be dizzying as a media consumer. The truth is, there's nothing necessarily normal about the economy right now. Now, some in the mainstream media tepidly note that the post-pandemic economy is actually pretty good. Yes, there is still a yawning economic inequality gap. Jeff Bezos is still so rich that a Dutch port almost dismantled part of a historic bridge for his super yacht. The Biden administration is doing its level best to tell the world that the economy is humming right along. But leading figures from two sectors of the economy are doing that whole Chicken Little thing and warning of a looming economic catastrophe. So let's dig in. UNFTR. If we're to listen to Wall Street and big tech, we're in store for a massive downturn. On Main Street, it's hard to ignore their calls. For most Americans, inflation has ranged from difficult to devastating. U.S. savings has declined from an all-time high during the pandemic to the lowest point since 2005, leaving many in a precarious position not seen since the run-up to the financial crisis, the reason so many were unprepared to weather that storm. So it's little wonder that there's fear in the air. The main culprit has indeed been inflation. On our podcast, we've gone into great detail to explain how inflation spiked as a result of stubborn supply chain issues in China, the disruption of food and gas from Ukraine, and sheer corporate greed. These issues are all being relieved one by one as inflation cools slightly, but it has had an outsized impact on the American consumer. But in terms of economic data in the here and now, the top-line numbers support the Biden administration's positive view to a large degree. The Commerce Department's latest report says that U.S. GDP increased at an annual clip of 2.9%, and consumer spending grew at a 2.1% rate. The official unemployment rate still stands at a 5-decade low of 3.5%. In any normal environment, as if normal still exists, these figures would be cause to celebrate. Despite all this, the tech overlords that control nearly all of the content that we see, our consumer habits, and who commodify our data in truly dystopian ways, are having a firing frenzy. Over the last year, big tech has laid off 200,000 workers, including nearly 50,000 this year alone. Happy New Year! Firms headquartered in Silicon Valley are responsible for about half of those job cuts in January. Silicon Valley has emerged as the layoff capital of the United States, with Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft responsible for a full quarter of the tech layoffs, at least in the last year. As usual, there's a little more to this story. But get this, these mega corporations are still raking in billions, but not nearly enough to make investors happy. That's right, it's all about the dividends. And the tech sector is coming off a year in which it added 260,000 jobs, growth not seen in 2 decades. Needless to say, a slowdown in growth for many of these firms was inevitable as other parts of the economy came back online. And believe me, most of these companies are doing just fine, despite the massive amount of layoffs. Take Alphabet, parent company of Google. The business had revenue of $69 billion for the last reporting quarter. It had a net margin of 23%, which is up 6.1% compared to the same quarter last year. Microsoft has tripled its revenue over the past dozen years and is printing cash. They averaged about $16 billion in net income each quarter in 2022. These figures are astounding. Now, over on Wall Street, it's pretty much the same story. Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley each had phenomenal quarters. Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo, not so much. But most of the declines on Wall Street related to a slowdown in mergers and acquisitions. The groups with the strongest wealth management divisions absolutely crushed it. So what does this mean? Well, if your core business is investment banking, things aren't great because the Fed increased interest rates, which makes debt financing pretty tricky. But if you manage the wealth of the 1%, you're doing just fine, because the 1% is still sitting on a preposterous amount of wealth. So what in the name of Milton Friedman is going on? So GDP is okay, the official unemployment number remains at historic lows, and inflation, or price gouging, but don't tell the corporate media that, is slowly declining. But it's still hurting the average American. Yet the wealthiest companies in the world, many of them monopolies, are shedding their workforce. So let's get into it. And before you shrug at the loss of thousands of seemingly high-paying positions, consider a few things. Many of those now without work represent the Millennial and Gen Z generations, groups that haven't quite experienced the crushing feeling of mass layoffs. Others are foreign workers holding visas that allow them to temporarily work for a U.S. corporation, and they have a limited amount of time to find a new job after being laid off. And as always, this is not just a story about one uber-wealthy sector. It's central to our ongoing discussion of modern capitalism, defined by a never-ending pursuit of higher quarterly profits, all thanks to an economy that's been completely captured by shareholders. So now let's talk about timing for a moment. Not since the dot-com bubble have we seen tech layoffs occurring at such a high rate. For the most part, these companies have not only thrived, but amassed immense power. In 2021 alone, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet combined spent nearly $60 million in lobbying, 1 year after coming under scrutiny during congressional antitrust hearings. And you can't tell the story of the Silicon Valley boom without talking about venture capitalists, which rained down money in the Bay Area. With interest rates at an all-time low, there was cheap money to be had, and big tech gobbled it all up. This quote from a Times article sums it up perfectly. Quote, "The whole tech industry of the last 15 years was built by cheap money." Now recall the early months of the pandemic. With everything transitioning to the internet, school, dinner orders, groceries, doctor's visits, happy hours, literally anything you can think of. Tech bet big on an all-digital future, which kind of made sense for a brief period as you were sipping IPAs over Zoom. So they went on a hiring spree. Again, here's a passage from The Gray Lady. Quote, "For a stretch of the pandemic, tech companies couldn't hire fast enough. Talent wars broke out in Silicon Valley, with firms vying for software engineers, often lavishing extravagant perks on their new and would-be hires. As profits soared, executives acted as if the party would never end." It was a party, but not the kind of one that I want to go to. Amazon, for example, announced $108 billion in sales for the quarter ending March 31st, 2021. They weren't the only ones flush with profits. With the sector booming, tech propped up the stock market while other industries treaded water. Everyone wanted to get into the action. More companies in Silicon Valley went public in 2020 amid the early days of the pandemic than in all of 2019. But the party had to come to an end. So who's to blame right now? Well, the neoliberal masters of the universe would like you to think that it's, well, you. Forget about corporate price gouging, the Fed ending the era of cheap money and raising interest rates, or yet another supply shock due to the war in Ukraine. One of the most odious figures in America, Larry Summers, and his fellow neoliberal economists have been blanketing the airwaves with calls to reduce the workforce, arguing that wages, which haven't kept pace with inflation, were the real problem. Not the fact that the combined assets of the billionaire class grew 50% since the pandemic, and so the axe started to fall. While there had been layoffs throughout 2022, the first big shoe to drop was Twitter. Just a few weeks into his reign, an over-leveraged Elon Musk on November 4th cut the social media company's workforce in half, raising concern about the platform's viability. Despite much consternation, Twitter is still in operation for now. 5 days later, Meta, Facebook's parent company, cut 10% of its company workforce. Many others followed. Salesforce, Spotify, Microsoft, Amazon, and Alphabet, along with other players like HP, Cisco, Zillow, IBM, DoorDash, Kraken, and too many others to name. You get the picture. Elon opened the doors, and the others came pouring through under the cover of his madness. Okay, but who are these workers that are getting laid off? The mass layoffs have seemed to target sales, marketing, recruiting, and human resources positions. But that's not all. Remember the response from major corporations throughout the United States following the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor? They were all very sympathetic, right? Mark Zuckerberg went on Facebook and actually said the words, "We stand with the Black community." How quick things change. According to Bloomberg, the current layoffs are gutting diversity and inclusion departments, and the outlet noted that openings for such positions fell by 19% last year. These layoffs have also exposed the faux culture big tech firms sold to an obsequious corporate media about the need to drive creativity and make work feel less like work. Now, as layoffs mount, axed workers are being painfully transparent about how much it sucks to be fired sitting in your living room all alone or learning their fate when failing to access company accounts. So much for the cult of company culture. So here we are. More than 200,000 tech jobs lost in the last year, despite many of these firms generating obscene amounts of wealth. They grew so fast that essentially a year after the pandemic started, the collective revenue of Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Meta ballooned to nearly $1.2 trillion. It's obvious what needs to happen. The labor revival spreading across the United States needs to penetrate through every sector of the economy, especially big tech. If multi-million-dollar baseball players can have a union, one that's regarded as among the most powerful in the country, so too can engineers, DEI professionals, and HR workers. Though we know it won't be easy, considering the way in which companies like Starbucks and Amazon have tried to quash unionizing efforts among the working class. But it's necessary. A recession may come, eventually. Though most of the leading indicators that precipitate prior recessions would indicate otherwise. But we're not in a normal functioning economy, in part due to continued supply shocks, the Fed's intervention into debt markets, and the effect that rising interest rates have on emerging market debt. We do live in a global economy. Jerome Powell and people like Larry Summers believe in the idea that slack in the economy is necessary to maintain price stability. Translation, they need more of you out of work. But there's a problem. 3 things made this almost impossible at this moment. 1, our immigration policy has prevented an influx of new workers, legal or otherwise, to alleviate hiring in certain sectors. 2, a record number of older workers finally decided to retire during the pandemic, and they're not coming back. And 3, we killed more than 1 million Americans with our response to COVID. That's why there is still a record number of job openings compared to those looking for work. The only thing that Powell and company are doing is making it more difficult for Americans to manage their daily lives, thus the decline in savings. But it's also creating a potential crisis in foreign debt markets like Latin America. It's a dangerous game that the Fed is playing. The upshot of the whole tech layoff debacle with Wall Street piling on is that workers are disposable in the pursuit of quarterly earnings per share. You might not have sympathy for the poor engineer sitting in an empty San Francisco apartment after discovering by a Slack message that their job had been eliminated. But this person is proxy for a bigger labor fight in America, for the rail workers that Biden turned his back on, for the Chris Smalls of the world who are hurling rocks at Goliath, for everyone out there hustling on nights and weekends. Remember that the wealth managers are doing just fine. Are you? Here endeth the video.